Hey everyone, Ren here. Welcome to my new YouTube channel. 2020 was a weird year for movies, as anyone could probably see. COVID shut things down early on, and with so many of the major releases indefinitely delayed, for most of the year it was unclear just what the future, or even the present, of cinema would hold. The separation of film from movie theaters was a blessing and a curse, as new releases are more accessible than ever before, but at the expense of the movie theater experience. For much of 2020, it was difficult to figure out where the good films were being released or even what they were, but they did exist. In fact, there were plenty of great films that came out this year, both before and during the quarantine. I'd like to review the past year in film and discuss the best and the worst that were released. We'll start with the worst. There were many good films this year, but like any other year, there were plenty of less than quality ones as well. I didn't see many that I outright despised though, so I'm going to keep this to a bottom 5. I'm not actually going to rank them either, I'm just going to present 5 films in an order that feels natural to me, as well as my reasoning as to why they are my least favorites of the year. Remember that this is all still my opinion, so all of this is subjective, and if you disagree with any of it, that's perfectly valid. If there was any film in 2020 that I truly couldn't stand, it was The Hunt. The Hunt is a nothing movie. It has nothing to say, and minimal entertainment value aside. At its best, it's the kind of movie you throw on at 2 in the morning when you can't sleep and then you immediately forget about it when it's done. I mean, Betty Gilpin is great in it at all, and there's some decent gore effects, but the plot structure is so boring, and not a single character is likable or even funny. I really wouldn't hate this movie so much if it didn't have its head so insufferably far up its ass. I mean, look at this poster. This movie is obsessed with how controversial it thinks it is, and in all fairness, Donald Trump's Twitter crusade against it did contribute to that. But in order to be controversial, a movie has to say or do something to warrant it. All The Hunt does is cobble together a bunch of lazy strawmen and point and laugh. It's so lazy. And I'm so tired of people giving this kind of writing a pass in the name of satire. Satire has to have a point, and this barely has any. It's just a bunch of wealthy Hollywood elites laughing at people for daring to have convictions. Something that actually succeeds at being shocking is Kantemir Balagov's Beanpole. Though unfortunately I found it shocking in all the wrong ways. This will be a rather controversial opinion, but I thought Beanpole was an absolutely miserable film. It received plenty of acclaim throughout its 2019-2020 festival run, and on paper I can see why. It's phenomenally well crafted, with excellent direction and acting, and beautiful painterly cinematography, but it really falls flat in execution. It's a film that attempts to show the personal and emotional fallout of living through a war, and while some aspects succeed in this regard, the film as a whole quickly devolves into an exercise in abject misery porn. There's a fine, and often subjective, line between a good film that's emotionally difficult and something that's just exploitative, and for me this falls into the latter category. It quickly became a film not about how the characters are trying to process their trauma, but a film about just how miserable they can be to themselves and to each other, with little to actually say on the matter. I just don't have the patience for something like this, but judging from how other people have reviewed it, your mileage may vary, and this may still be worth checking out. I, for one, was not a fan.
Ça va mon chéri?
Ouais.
Mon Dieu, mais qu'est-ce que tu lui as fait?
Maman, elle s'est chavirée, c'est tout, c'est rien.
Summer of '85 is another film I have no patience for. Seriously? Are we really still telling this kind of story? Francois Ozon is known for telling stories exploring sexuality and mortality, but this is probably the least interesting way to combine those ideas into a coming-of-age film. What first starts off as a sort of morbid reworking of the dazzling summer vistas of something like Call Me By Your Name quickly turns into yet another manic pixie dream girl story, except instead of a teenage girl, it's a gay man fitting the role. The first half of this film is pretty decent, but the second half makes so many bizarre, unnecessary, and downright insulting narrative choices that by the end I was just tired and frustrated rather than moved.
You're not alone. Not anymore. Do you know what mutants are?
Now on to a somewhat less controversial take. To be honest, I almost didn't include The New Mutants in my list, not because it's not bad, but because it was the first movie I had seen in theaters in months, and I was so happy to be back that I kind of enjoyed it. That being said, this is a huge mess of a movie that does almost nothing well. It has no pacing, an incredibly messy structure, and no tone to speak of. It tries so hard to recreate the teen slasher formula of Dream Warriors, but also feeds in a heaping helping of campy X-Men action. As a result, this film feels like none of these things at all and has no identity of its own. It isn't even remotely scary because there's no atmosphere, the tone is all wrong, and the twist is so obviously telegraphed that there are barely any stakes. This is just a bafflingly ill-conceived film, and it was not worth the wait for it at all.
I'm Sonic, a little ball of super energy in an extremely handsome package.
Last up is Sonic the Hedgehog. I'm putting this one last because I really don't have all that much to say about it. I don't have as many outright grievances with it as the others on this list, but I also got no enjoyment from it either, because there's just so little here to begin with. Jim Carrey was funny, and that owl in the beginning was pretty, and that's about it. The rest is just unfunny jokes, a boring plot, generic action, and so many meme references. I know this probably just wasn't made for me, but I do have to be true to myself. I had a very poor time watching this one. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we have the best movies of 2020. I saw far more that I actually liked this year, and a lot more new releases than I normally see in general, so I have 15 prepared to talk about today, representing my personal favorite films of the year. Again, this is not going to be ranked from best to worst, and it's all my opinion, so it will inevitably be subjective. On the flip side of something like The Hunt, I really can't think of a more flawless film that I saw this year than Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Portrait sees French auteur Céline Sciamma reaching new heights with this searingly emotional queer romance exploring the autonomy of women and the relationship between art, memory, and personal strength. The film feels at once like a painting and a bonfire, beautiful and passionate, impressionistic and hypnotic all at once. The ending is one for the ages, wielding the emotional force of a sledgehammer, yet delivering it with the tender grace of a gentle, loving caress. Portrait isn't exactly a happy film, but it's not really a tragedy either. Ultimately, it leaves us with the message that while emotions and memories may be fleeting, they also make us stronger.
I didn't see you at school today. I went to the doctor. What's wrong? Girl problems?
2020 was a great year for stories about the experiences of young women coming to terms with themselves and the world around them. Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always feels like it's likely to be that one indie darling that blasts through all of the festivals and then gets completely ignored by the Academy because it wasn't released in December. It's a delightfully minimalistic work of neo-realism from Eliza Hittman charting the journey of a pair of teenage girls traveling to New York City to discreetly get an abortion. Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always resists the temptation to veer into Satyrian and/or exploitative drama, instead opting for a purely character-driven approach studying personal autonomy and friendship in teenage girls. What really makes this film so special is that it doesn't get bogged down in weighing the ethical and moral concerns of abortion. Its protagonist has already made up her mind and the film trusts her judgment, letting the audience feel how they'd like to about it. Top that off with excellent direction and acting and at least one utterly brilliant, emotionally searing sequence, and you have a true hidden gem from the murky depths of 2020.
What's your name?
King Lou.
They call me Cookie.
First Cow is another indie darling, though one with considerably more attention being given it. Director Kelly Reichardt and A24 bring us one of the most acclaimed films of 2020 and one of the most tender cinematic experiences of my lifetime. In one of the most stressful and exhausting years in recent memory, First Cow is a much-needed release. Watching it feels like a warm, tender hug, like cuddling quietly with a loved one or curling up on the couch with a warm drink and a weighted blanket. Its portrayal of the American frontier is one of the most achingly nostalgic and lovingly beautiful in cinema. With every scene oozing a sort of timeless wholesomeness, you can practically smell the fresh soil, feel the forest mist on your skin, sense the faint night breeze against your face. The picture is wrapped up in a loving portrait of masculine friendship, as well as somewhat darker undertones involving the inevitable doom of colonization that gives the film just enough edge to work on multiple levels. But in spite of the negative emotions around the borders, there's a truly beautiful timelessness to it that keeps it in my heart.
How you doing, Holly? How's it going? How are you?
Good Pesach out.
All right, Larry, you're a Jew again. Welcome back.
Perhaps the total opposite of First Cow's wholesomeness is the Safdie brothers' Uncut Gems. Most people wouldn't consider this a 2020 film, but I saw it and reviewed it in 2020, so I'm going to count it. One of the most anxiety-inducing films of the past 2 years, the Safdie brothers' newest darkly comic character study very nearly converted me into an Adam Sandler fan single-handedly. I normally can't stand his films, but this is easily some of the best acting I've seen all year. This look at the life and personality of a thrill-seeking gambler is a cross between a pitch-black comedy and a high-strung crime thriller, in which a man in an already bad situation seems utterly incapable of not digging himself deeper. There's not all that much more I can say about this one that hasn't already been said, but if you haven't checked this one out yet, you absolutely should.
It just doesn't make any sense.
What?
Adrian wouldn't kill himself.
Listen, you're getting your freedom back, okay? Don't let him haunt you.
Hello?
Crossing over from thriller into pure horror, we have the closest thing we really got to a mega genre hit before the pandemic shut everything down and threw the entire film industry into pure chaos. The Invisible Man is Leigh Whannell's surprising horror remake of the classic H.G. Wells story, or the Universal horror franchise if you'd prefer. If there is anything I wasn't expecting much from, it was a Blumhouse-funded horror remake releasing in the first quarter of 2020. I did end up seeing it though, and I was utterly shocked at just how much of a pure blast this movie was. More of a reimagining than a remake, The Invisible Man posits the question of what would happen if an already scary man gained the power to be anywhere and do anything. While the film gets admittedly ridiculous at times, it's equal parts thrilling, fun, and twisted, and through some legitimately clever directing tricks, an intelligent script, and an incredible performance by Elizabeth Moss, The Invisible Man transforms a classic science fiction tale into a frightening and engrossing allegory for domestic abuse and gaslighting. Another great horror movie from 2020. This is not likely to be on many people's lists, but as someone who loves campy genre movies, Color Out of Space was nothing but a delight. This adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's iconic work was the most fun I've had in theaters all year, and I was able to catch this in theaters before the pandemic. It's pure genre filmmaking. There's not much here in the way of plot or theme, but instead, director Richard Stanley goes full throttle on body horror, cosmic dread, and utterly bonkers and captivatingly inventive visuals. Nicolas Cage is let off the leash in a big way, delivering an incredibly unhinged masterclass in camp acting, and throughout the entire spectacle we're treated to some genuinely horrifying, mind-bending, and creative visuals. That's not to say there are no flaws. Again, the plot isn't much, there's little emotional stakes to speak of, and there are some moments of bad CGI as well. But overall, this is pure, spooky B-movie bliss, and I loved nearly every minute of it.
So, how would you feel about going to the mountains for Christmas with Grace? She really wants to get to know you guys.
As you might be able to guess, horror is one of my favorite genres, and there were more than a couple great ones earlier in the year. On the flip side from the latter thrills of Color Out of Space and The Invisible Man is the slow burn, claustrophobic dread of The Lodge. While I'm not a huge fan of Veronica Franz and Severin Fiala's debut film, the cult hit Goodnight Mommy, The Lodge, I felt, was a strong step in the right direction. This film did a better job than anything else this year at getting under my skin and staying there. This is a dark, almost unbearably bleak and depressing horror film in the vein of recent art house genre hits like Hereditary, and its claustrophobic setup only serves as a foundation on which to build a story of manipulation, gaslighting, and intense religious guilt. I think that despite this film's rather underwhelming finale, it's a profoundly underrated work that contains some of the year's most haunting images.
Afuera hay un lobo. ¿Hay algún chileno aquí? Hola, vengo de la colonia.
Believe it or not, The Lodge still isn't the darkest film to be released this year. In many ways, The Wolf House is one of the most disturbing films I've ever seen. It's an audiovisual nightmare that also features some of the most creative usage of stop-motion animation, perhaps of all time. It's really quite incredible how much work and passion was put into this piece, and that almost makes it a shame just how repulsive it is. But, of course, that's exactly what this film is going for. The Wolf House feels like what would happen if you reached into a child's mind and pulled out their darkest, most carefully repressed nightmare. There is a nearly unbearable tension between the dread and discomfort evoked by the film's visual style and the simple, fairy tale-esque story that makes the experience of watching it feel as if your brain is actively blocking you from understanding the full horrors that you're subjecting it to. Add to that the fact that this film is inspired by actual Nazi war crimes committed in Chile under the Pinochet regime, and you have one of the most haunting animated films ever made.
What the... What is this place?
What's your name, honey?
I'm Joe. I teach middle school band. Got it, go for it!
The most popular animated film of the year is undoubtedly the newest Pixar film, Soul. Soul is easily the studio's best film in quite a while, and though it may be recency bias that's affecting my opinion here, I think given a year or two this could sit comfortably alongside the studio's classics. This is the studio's most mature and grounded film to date, despite having such a high concept premise, and it finds so many moments of genuine emotion and sheer brilliance in its quiet moments of contemplation and connection between its characters. It's a vibrant and affirming portrait of all the wonders of life, and it features perhaps the most well-realized depiction of the real world that I've ever seen in 3D animation. There's so much about this movie, from its characters to its style, to its messages, to its score, that I absolutely adore. And it's a shame this is the only movie on this list that I haven't done a full review of.
Wolf, wolf, hunt them far and yonder.
The forest is brimming with wolves. It's my job to hunt them down, not yours.
But we could hunt them together. Wolves, bears, dragons even.
All that aside, though, the animated film that resonated with me the most this year was Wolfwalkers. This feels like a film that was specifically made for me. It's everything I love to see in animation all in one package. It's a powerful, mythological parable, and yet at the same time a fun, family-friendly fairy tale. Cartoon Saloon has produced some of the most noteworthy animated features of the decade this side of Studio Ghibli, including the wonderful Song of the Sea, director Tom Moore's previous outing from 2014. I absolutely adored that film, and this one is even better. The Ghibli-esque themes of civilization versus nature are told through a more Western lens, framing the conflict as one between Christian imperialism and traditional paganism, with the titular characters able to walk through both worlds. The animation is beautiful, the protagonist is one of my favorites in recent years, the soundtrack is wonderful, and it all comes together in such a breathtaking way. Everything about this film is just incredible, and the furry-oriented premise of humans who can turn into wolves just makes it even better.
High school was rough. High school was rough. Once I discovered the fandom, I could chat with people online. I could express my creativity. I could make...
Speaking of furries, the furry fandom is a huge part of my life, but it's one that I've long felt like I couldn't be open about due to its negative reputation. I won't say there's absolutely nothing wrong with the fandom, but being a furry is something I'm proud of regardless. And I love how Ash Coyote's documentary The Fandom is just a pure celebration of what it means to be a furry. It's a love letter to our legacy and a thorough deconstruction of what makes it what it is. It's definitely not a perfect documentary, and there's plenty that it leaves out or skims over, but it's also part of an ongoing series of shorter and longer documentaries that you can find on Ash Coyote's channel. I'm definitely a little biased on this one, but I loved this documentary and I'm so glad to have something that I can easily point to when people ask me what this whole furry thing is about.
I can't even tell you how many times I've been in public space, particularly early in my transition, when I would walk into a subway car and people would just burst into laughter. And I think people are been trained to have that reaction.
A similar but more important reframing of mainstream narratives came with Disclosure: Trans Lives on Screen. The history of cinema has not been kind to trans people, so often casting us as jokes, perverts, and villains. While gender nonconformity has always been something of a fascination for Hollywood, it very rarely has been to our benefit. Even when our stories were told, they were never told by us, instead being so often written, directed, and acted by cisgender people exploiting our tragedies. Disclosure is quite a powerful step forward for our community, gathering trans actors, writers, and directors of all kinds to discuss our experiences and reframe the narrative surrounding us in cinema and television. It's an excellent and even revolutionary opening of the gate for the trans community to finally seize the power to tell our own stories and reclaim the symbols and narratives that have been used to harm us for so long. It's not everything, but it's more than we've ever had, and it's a powerful, enlightening experience that I can only hope will open the door for more like it in the future.
Give it up next for Ellie Chu.
Chugga chugga choo choo!
The good thing about being different in a town like this is that no one expects you to be like them.
I saw a lot of queer films this year, and a lot of them really resonated with me, particularly these next two. Coming-of-age movies have been very popular in the independent film scene as of late, especially in the context of queer cinema. It's become somewhat of a cliché, to be honest, but the half of it manages to feel fresh in spite of that. Director Alice Wu looks at the coming-of-age experience through a number of interesting angles, from the story of an Asian American immigrant family finding their place to that of a young queer woman discovering who she wants to be in small-town religious America. Most of all, though, the half of it is such an endearingly good-faith film that I find it impossible not to love. All of the characters are such wonderful people that even when they make mistakes, we still root for them. Furthermore, the half of it walks the difficult tightrope of making a compelling teen movie nearly effortlessly, understanding that these struggles are small in the face of the world, but at the same time showing us that in this moment they mean everything to these characters.
After this person. And clear.
Now. There's a camera there, and there.
Simultaneously, one of the most subtle and yet profoundly queer movies on this list, Miranda July's Sundance hit Kajillionaire is one of the quirkiest films of the year, almost to an off-putting extent. The humor in it is so dry and awkward that right off the bat, only a few people will really be into it. But if you're able to meet Kajillionaire where it's at, it's very much a sweet, heartwarming story. Its simple setup allows for a shockingly nuanced exploration of generational dynamics in America, and the way in which the hyper-individualistic consumerism of the boomer generation's capitalist mindset has created a world in which the younger generation knows nothing but alienation and loneliness. But its true wonders are in how it shows us a way forward, that we are capable of change and connection, that we are more than just our upbringings, and we are capable of being loved and cared for, with a subtle yet powerful romantic story that culminates in a true sense of liberation for the protagonist. The central performance by Evan Rachel Wood really holds this movie together, and I think she should be given some awards consideration this year.
Mr. Stone, your hearing is deteriorating rapidly.
And the hearing that you have lost is not coming back.
Finally, we have one of the most singularly powerful films of 2020, Darius Marder's debut film Sound of Metal. I actually watched this one during the process of making this video, and to be honest, this one resonated with me on an incredibly deep level. On one layer, it's a powerful story about the struggles and experiences of the deaf community, and while I'm not a part of that community and can't speak for them, it seems to do a good job at generating empathy without sacrificing the autonomy and empowerment of the community it's portraying. At the same time, it's an incredible story about recovery and radical acceptance, and in a year with one of the grimmest versions of reality we've seen in a while, this is the story that all of us need. Riz Ahmed turns in a powerhouse performance, and I've never been more invested in a potential nominee for Best Sound Design. This film does some incredible things with its audio editing to really put you in the shoes of its protagonist, and I encourage you to watch this with headphones if you can to get the full experience. But even outside of this is a searing but ultimately enlightening story. I also wanted to pick out 5 honorable mentions for the year. First, we have And Then We Danced, an uneven but nevertheless revolutionary coming-of-age film about a young gay dancer in hyper-conservative Georgia, the country, not the state. The ending scene of this is nothing short of incredible. Boys State, a fun, fascinating, and low-key terrifying exploration of bipartisan politics through the lens of a summer camp for teenage boys. I'm Thinking of Ending Things, a mysterious, twisted, and ambitious film. The second half gets way too bloated and self-indulgent for its own good, but it's a genuinely unsettling and original film regardless. Made in Abyss, Dawn of the Deep Soul. The shadow of this film's grossly problematic manga source material prevents me from putting this in my top 15, but the anime is a problematic favorite of mine, and this is an excellent continuation that really struck a chord for me. Palm Springs, a delightfully low-stakes science fiction rom-com that playfully explores ideas of philosophy and physics to tell a funny, entertaining, and comforting story about finding the drive to live in a seemingly uncaring world. If you're upset that one of your favorites didn't make it in, I should mention that a lot of the films I was hoping to see in the past few months, such as the ones I'm showing on screen right now, I didn't get a chance to see because of some mental issues that came up. There are a number of films that I'm hoping to catch up on next year, some of which I may count towards my 2021 list, depending on when I see them. Overall, 2020 wasn't a great year for film, but it wasn't quite as bad as many people have made it out to be. If you knew where to look, there were still some quality releases put out, many of which were far more accessible than they may otherwise have been. Now it's time to look forward to 2021, where we're getting a lot of the anticipated 2020 releases that were delayed due to the pandemic, as well as all sorts of new discoveries. I already have a list of anticipated films, including some delayed horror films from 2020, some releases that I didn't have the opportunity to see in 2020, some new animated features, and some general new releases whose trailers have already captivated me. I hope to really get this YouTube channel going in the new year, and in big part I will be discussing movies, though I'll be doing some other stuff too. I hope you all will join me for this journey, and even if you don't, I hope that your 2021 is one to look forward to. And remember to like and subscribe if you want to see more videos similar to this one. See you!